did you do a study to talk about how many African Americans and how many Hispanics within the city of Richmond are obese at this time in this obesity law?
We have estimates of those for the city of Richmond. Those estimates are based, I want to be very clear, we have
Right.
good data about the kids. For the adults, it's more estimates. Those estimates are based on the survey data that exists for the Bay Area and for California, based on ethnicity, and then using the ethnic distribution in the city of Richmond. So those percentages for African Americans and Hispanics are similar. I mean, they're basically the similar kinds of percentages that we see in the Bay Area and California as a whole. It's not the city of Richmond that's really different than the rest of the state. But in the city of Richmond, we have a high concentration of low-income and minority people. So we have a particularly high rates of obesity. We see it very specifically in the Richmond children. We know it's there in the Richmond adults, and it leads to higher rates of disease.
How did you do your study, the difference between low income and obese children? What did you use? How did you just knock on people's door and say, hey, are you low income, or did they give you a form, or?
We didn't.
Or is it just something you guessed at?
We don't have the income of the children. The children obesity data is based on the schools, and it's just reported by school and ethnicity. It's not reported by income. But we do know what schools are in the low-income areas and which schools have the high percentage of reduced and subsidized lunch, which is a real marker for the income of the population in those schools. And we do know where we all know in this room where the low-income areas are in the county and in the city.
You know, Dr. Bruner, I tend to differ with you on that. Some people that go to low-income schools probably have more money than you got in the bank. And so, you know, I think that's not a fair analogy. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is, you remember the McDonald's toy thing in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay, and they were going to charge for the toys. They told them to discontinue them totally, but they did charge for them. And they charged 10 cents a toy.
Right.
They didn't change anything. All they did was cause them to pay 10 cents more. I go along with Councilman Bates just a minute ago. You're putting a tax on poor people. And I take back, I'm a little incensed that you have an obesity law for obese people, because you know what? I know a lot of people that are healthy. I'm not really sure you call them obese. I know when I was going to junior high school, some of the ladies that you might be calling obese, we thought were pretty big-legged women. So, I mean, you know, and I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm just saying that the way you categorize the people, I just would like to know on what channels or what criteria that you actually can put in front of me to ask the taxpayers of Richmond to pay all this money to put this on a ballot. And before I leave you, matter of fact, Mr. City Manager, how much would it cost us to make this a ballot measure, roughly? I know you don't know right now, but just roughly.
That actually might be best addressed to the city clerk if I can put her on the spot. She knows more about the election costs than I do.
The cost, if it's on the November ballot next year, we would consolidate with other jurisdictions, and then the cost would be based on the number of registered voters we have in November of next year. So, for instance, last year our actual election cost us around $50,000 because we consolidated. Now, this past June, when we were standing alone, we paid over $200,000 for that ballot measure.
Well, ladies and gentlemen of the public, I want you to listen to what she just said. You got a 50,000 on the low and 100,000 on the 200,000 on the high, and you're not going to change anything, and you're going to call your kids obese, obesity tax. It's terrible to me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you. Doctor, you mentioned earlier, and I know you're not a statistical expert, but could you tell us what you do know about the combination of the tax on cigarettes and the educational programs? Because my understanding, it's about as, to me, probably about as close of an apples-to-apples comparison as we have here. And my understanding was there was a very dramatic drop both in the smoking rates, but especially in the underage smoking rates following those two things happening. Can you tell me what Do you remember the figures on that?
Well, the exact figures I don't have on the top of my head, but the tax on cigarettes and the anti-smoking California campaign in California, I think, is one of the great triumphs of public health in the last 50 years in terms of reducing smoking and the enormous health impacts of that. I'm not about to say that a sugar-sweetened beverage tax here in the city of Richmond would be that order of magnitude of what was accomplished in California with the cigarette tax. I think the obesity epidemic is in some ways more difficult than smoking. You know, it was easy, we just demonized cigarettes, we just demonize them. We all need to eat, and I eat sugar too, and that's fine in moderation. So we can't just like demonize food and demonize sugar, and we certainly never demonize smokers or people who are overweight. So I think it's a more difficult problem than tobacco. Tobacco was a tremendous success, and California led the way in that. Richmond led the way in Contra Costa County. Contra Costa County led the way in California. Richmond was the first city in Contra Costa when we, in 1994, to pass legislation restricting smoking in public places and in the workplace, and there was an awful lot of opposition to it at the time.
Well, I've read, and I was wondering if you agree with this statement, and if it's true, it's really frightening to me, that our generation is the first one where the children will live shorter lives, and that it's due to the childhood obesity epidemic. Do you agree with that statement?
That information's estimates been put out by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and I think it's likely to be true. Or potentially true if we don't do something about it. And that is the point that we're seeing from our data here in Richmond. The high rates of childhood obesity, the way it goes, leads to higher rates of adult obesity. And it's not that everybody who goes into a low-income school is low-income and certainly not obese, but more than half of them are. And that's the direction we're seeing for a new generation where, we're looking at a generation that's not going to do as well economically as their parents, perhaps, and maybe not live as long.
Thank you. I, as always, appreciate your thoroughness and professionalism, your being willing to talk to us. And as we hear from the speakers, I'm open to having different responses to the childhood obesity problem, but I think we have to deal with it. And as the doctor said, it's not going to be an easy, quick fix, and some of the solutions probably are going to be painful. I'm open to hearing what they are, but I do think we need to move on it. A lot of the same controversy surrounded the efforts to cut down on smoking. A lot of the same arguments were made. Why is the government playing nanny? Why is it telling people what to do in their personal lives? Blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that we did make that choice. We led that effort. I was part of that, and it has worked. It hasn't worked entirely, but it has worked somewhat. And I lost a brother probably due to smoking, and I don't want to lose any relatives due to the childhood obesity epidemic, and we need to take some type of action. If this isn't the right action, or if there's better ones, I'm open to hearing about it, but I am absolutely insistent that we have to respond to this public health crisis.
Okay, thank you. As